Alrighty, so we're ready to start doing UVs. If you haven't, check out my last video about like what UVs are and how they relate to your 3D mesh. I'll be doing some more of that in this video, but this one's gonna be more about setting up your cuts and unfolding it properly so then you can bring it into an outside program and start texturing it, okay? So, I'm gonna start with some ZBrush geometry, just very low poly, right? I've Zremeshed this, so the face topology is kind of messed up, and the legs have been simplified, the fingers got simplified as well, and I'm just going to export that, and I'm gonna do yes, and I'm just going to do all, so I'm gonna get all those subtools out of there, right? So we have our Maya scene right here. I'm gonna actually hide this guy because he has a lot of unique shapes that you might be curious about, and we can explore how I've unwrapped those later. But for right now, I'm going to import that low poly ZBrush model. Let's check out what it looks like. Do I have, oh, okay. I had to isolate select on, sorry about that. And some prep for this, I like to do mesh display, unlock normals on anything that comes out of ZBrush because it locks them down usually. And I also like to select everything, and then I assign the standard surface 1 material to that. And there we go. Now, I mentioned this in the last video about some extra prep, so let's just do it in real time right here. I have symmetry enabled, and I'm just going to extrude out some of these and just resolve how this sleeve works, right? If I take this and I extrude it and I extrude it again and then scale it, I can just have it intersect with that arm, and then no one's gonna be bothered if they see like this angle of the character now, right? I'm gonna do the same thing right here. And I'm going to do the same thing for the rest of the shirt there. Let's scale that out. And I'm gonna do the same thing on the bottom. For this, I'm just going to tuck it into the body because it's real close. Same for the pants. And we are ready to to start doing our UVs. I'm gonna also soften my edges, just get a little bit softer shading in there. But yeah, so that's all of our prep there. Oh, sorry, for the body, I'd also like to reiterate that anything that is hidden in here, there is no need to have that on our character, right? So I'm just selecting some of those faces right there, and then I can add to that selection as well. And the lasso tool can be very helpful for this. I'm gonna grab just a nice area around there. I'm gonna grab down to the body, and there we go. And then I usually verify with 5 to make sure I'm not selecting anything that accidentally is visible. We're looking good, and then I can simply delete that. That's gonna, if you don't have a scene where your character takes off their clothes, that step right there is gonna save you so much headache, because when you rig, that clothing clips through the skin very easily. Also, we just freed up so many faces that would have had to go in our UV map, so it's very optimized that way. I really recommend that you delete anything that you're not gonna see because of those reasons, right? Okay, so how do we do UVs, y'all? It's very simple to start out with. It gets a little bit confusing your first time, but dude, once you understand them, you start flying through this, right? It's 4 main steps for UVs: create, cut, unfold, and layout. You'll notice that in your UV editor, again, pop it open if you haven't seen it, it's right up there. In your UV editor, it has them in that order as well: create, cut, unfold, and then it has like a little align and snap panel, but then it also has arrange and layout. Perfect. So let's make some UVs that we can use, right? Right now, these are my UVs. Stuff that comes from Zbrush ordinarily does not have UVs unless it's been particularly put in there to begin with. And you can see that this shirt is no different. It has no usable UVs. If you saw my UVs for my other character, you can see it's like, okay, this is the cape, this is the hand, it's all unfolded, that's the pants right there, right? So you can see that it takes some prep time to get this going. So let's do our first step. The create step is how you can just make new fresh UVs. You always got to start with some fresh UVs. I recommend camera based or planar. If you're doing planar, shift click it and do keep image width height ratio. And if you left click it, it goes from the X axis. If you middle click it, it goes from the Y axis. And if you right click it, it goes from the front right there. You get the Z axis projection there. You'll commonly hear this called projecting your UVs because it's using some math to project this on like a plane or from the camera's view direction, or from like, if you do automatic, you get some gross freaking UVs there, but it's projecting it from the like, what it thinks is like the best plane there, you know, I guess it's more of like a triplanar mapping if you're familiar with that. And then we have cylindrical. These cylindrical and spherical, they have like use cases, but I really just recommend doing camera based or planar. I'm going to do a planar projection. And next up, also you can simply project individual faces. If you really screw up like the sleeve or something, you could select that and then do a planar projection on that. Be careful with that though, because you need to understand that you just created a different UV shell, right? These are two separate UV shells and each of them have just tiny UVs in there. But yeah, so be aware of that. It's going to be separated off. But you can project new UVs if you mess something up, or if you just have a better projection angle with like a certain camera view or something like that, you know. So I'm gonna get fresh UVs on there again. And next up, right, that was the first step, create. Next up, we got to cut. So every single object, in order to unfold, if you saw the cube in that last video, like how that was unfolded, like how do you unfold a cube? You'd have to cut along the edge of it. Imagine this as wrapping paper on a present, right? And say that like, let's just pull up a picture. And I'm gonna do like present, wrapping. Beep. There we go. These are basically textures, right? That paper has a design printed on it. That is the texture. And then they're wrapping it around the shape, right? So you can think of your 3D mesh as that shape that needs to be wrapped around. These UVs are the wrapping paper. Now they are very much the same, right? Like I can select a vertex in here and then that's gonna select it in my 3D view. So they are the same, but it's a nice way to visualize what's happening there. And then you can carefully unfold that back into its 2D view, paint your own design on this, and then you could hypothetically fold that back around your present to get like some custom wrapping paper. But that's essentially what we're doing in 3D, right? So if we go in, how do we know where to set our cuts right here? Now, for clothing, it's really nice because your clothes naturally already have the seams on them. In a factory where they built this or where they assembled this, it was a 2D textile, right? This was a 2D textile. Let me go back one page because I believe I had an example here. Boom, perfect. This shirt, you can see the sleeve was a different piece of fabric. That's what that seam is right there. It was sewing those pieces of fabric together. You have one on the shoulder right there. You have one on the side of the shirt. You have the button line down there. Now, like, you don't need all of those. You can probably get away with just a couple of those, but that's a good way to start. So let's do that on ours right here. I'm gonna go into edge mode. You're gonna be cutting your UV edges in edge mode. And I'm going to double click that edge. If you're lucky, you'll have a nice edge loop there. If you retopologized with quad draw or something, odds are you have an edge there as well. And I'm simply going to cut it. Boom, perfect. Perfect. Now you'll notice there is, if I go into object mode, you can see this thick line right there. That is our texture border. You can turn that on and off with 9. Please, please keep it on, okay? Now when you're cutting your edges, you want to be very careful not to be in this view, or sorry, in object mode, and click cut. I see a lot of students do that, and then they're like, Mike, why does my shirt look weird, right? It looks weird because you just told it to cut every single face into its own UV island, right? So you absolutely screwed up your UVs there. You have to start again back to basics, right? So, so don't do that. Please, when you're cutting edges, understand that it cuts immediately when you press the button, and you should be cutting in edge mode. So I'm gonna cut. Next up, how do we unfold this, right? How do we unfold that, right? We need more cuts along that sleeve, right? If you notice, we have a nice seam right there. So let's do that in on our shape right here. So I'm gonna double click that edge. Ooh, the selection didn't go too great around there. Sometimes, if you have bad topology, you might need to do something weird like this and just kind of select across manually to try to get a better line like that. That's still not ideal. Do your own topology if you want those to be fixed. Thankfully, I think this edge loop goes around nicely. So I'm gonna do that, and then I'm gonna do cut, and you'll see that that is a new UV shell. Ooh, look at that. Okay, now we're ready to potentially unfold this. Okay, now if I do the, I want to talk about the opposite of cutting. What if, for instance, you accidentally do a cut somewhere where you didn't want it, right? You can always do the opposite of that, which is so. So now there's no UV seam there, right? Now if I tried to unfold this sleeve, watch what happens. Ooh, that does not look very much like a piece of cloth. That looks like some sort of, I don't know, like the sandworms from Dune or something, like coming straight at you. Like, what's going on there, right? So it didn't have anywhere to unfold, right? If someone handed you like a basketball and was like, hey, unfold this. One, you'd be like, sir, why are you approaching me on the street so aggressively? What's going on? Two, you couldn't do it. You would need to cut along some edges in there to free up space to actually unfold that. So let's reintroduce that good seam along the shirt right there. So I'm gonna cut that, and now let's try to unfold this. Now, you'll see me use this window a lot where I hold shift and I hold right click, and then that gives me a lot of tools really fast. I prefer that rather than going through this. So it's the same functions though. But let's unfold this now. Look at that. Oh, ho, ho, ho. Very good. Okay. So that's what we need, all right? If we were to not unfold that, you might have thought that it looked pretty good before, right? But note this torso shape, right? You can see the back side and the front side at the same time. So if you exported it like this and brought it into Substance Painter, then you would see that when you paint the front, whoop, it would also be painting on the back because they're in the same UV space right there. They're right on top of each other. That's why we have to unfold all these shapes, right? So so that's another concept that you should be working with. Like, how can I best set up my cuts to be ready to unfold properly and not have any UV overlap, right? You'll notice that on that shirt example, we have a seam at the top, whoop, right there. And so let's get a cut along that as well. And I could do that. I could cut all the way around there. I'm gonna deselect this There's a very specific reason why I'm deselecting that. Let me just get this cut though, and then let me unfold. Oops, sorry. Unfold, there we go. And then we can move that over. I like to unfold in UV shell mode in case you're wondering, but you can unfold in just regular UV mode as well. But yeah, unfold, look at that. So when you're unfolding these, there's something that you need to be thinking about. And that's this little guy up here, this little checkerboard, right? I want you to think of these checkerboards as pixels that are wrapped around your mesh, right? The more skewed and stretched these are, the more skewed and stretched your pixels will be as well, right? In your final texture. Ideally, you want to get that out of there. You'll notice that before we unfolded that, look at how much stretching was happening around the side there. Look at that, it looks awful. Your pixels would be getting stretched into the next dimension over there. Let's unfold it. Boom, and then you see some really nice, even, uniform squares. Now, you can't get it to be perfectly uniform everywhere, right? It's just geometrically impossible. That's what the UV edges are for, right? Now, you also saw that I deselected this part up here, right? I didn't want to have a seam on the top of my shirt, right? The reason is because as soon as you have a seam, look, you have a little texture line in there, right? It's not very appealing, and if you have like a tiling material on it, it's gonna look a little bit bad at that border right there, right? So when you're cutting seams, try to keep them in a spot that's hidden. That's why we have them on the bottom of the shirt, right? It just really helps to hide that and make it look really nice and cohesive, right? You want to hide those seams. That's why I wouldn't do one in the back, you know, or one in the front. It's gonna be a little bit apparent. So if you ever have an option, keep the seam on the back of the object or on the side or something, you know, somewhere where it's a little bit more hidden. Fantastic. So that's looking great. And we've just created, cut, and unfolded all of that shape. Now, if you wanted to only texture this shirt, the last step would be to lay them out so they fit in this little 0 to 1 tile. If you don't, I like to do a little bit of an orient before, and then I'll grab and then press E on any of these shells to rotate them, and I'll hold J to snap rotate so I can kind of straighten out some of these. Oh, let's turn off symmetry so I can do these separately. There we go. And then shift click your layout options. I like to add a little bit of shell padding and a little bit of tile padding. Sometimes I'll do 4 pixels of shell padding depending on how complex the object is or simple, you know. And then I like to turn off rotation. That way I don't get weird rotation, but you have to orient your shells if you're doing that. Otherwise it's going to be annoying. And then let's click apply again. And there you go. Now it's laid them out. Your mesh is ready to be textured if you export that, right? Now the problem is we have some other objects in here, so let's do some of these other shapes, like the legs right here. If I'm looking down at my pants, I have a seam on the outside of the pants and on the inside right there. Boom. So I'm gonna grab both of those and let's do symmetry on that. It's kind of hard to tell like what this Zremeshed geometry is doing up in there. It looks the geometry looks a little bit jagged. Hopefully we can get this to work. Wow. Okay, this is actually a little bit messed up in here. I really recommend deleting some of these artifacts, otherwise you're gonna get non-manifold geometry. And if you see Maya talking about non-manifold geometry, you'll want to do a mesh cleanup of it. Let's see if these unfold though. Let's see if it lets us. So first step, let's do it all over again. Planar. I'm doing a planar map. I could do camera based. That's also fine. And then let's go into edge. And I'm gonna grab those. I'm gonna grab the inside edge and the outside edge, and then I'm going to cut that. And I do have 2 different shells. Every time I cut, if I'm intending to cut off a different shell, I always make sure that it is actually a different object. Ooh, we have some unappealing geometry in here. Let's delete that. That was an artifact of the Zremeshed process in there. Now let's go to UV shell. Let's try to unfold this. Hopefully it's not non-manifold. Nice, very cool. If you try to unfold and it's talking about non-manifold geometry, close that. Like, don't run the tool. Don't, because Maya will promise it's like, hey, I can fix this non-manifold geometry for you, but like, dude, it's going to mess up your mesh if you do that. The proper way to check is if you go to mesh, clean up, and go to the option box on that. You don't want to ever just run it just regular. You go to options, do select matching polygons, and then you can search for like any n-gons on your model, lamina faces, non-manifold geometry, edges with 0 length, faces with 0 geometry area. So then it will highlight problematic areas in there for you, and you can resolve them yourself manually. If that doesn't work, sometimes you might need to reproject your UVs in case they're problematic. If that doesn't work, then sometimes you just got to press Control-1 to isolate and just investigate. Like, I'm surprised that this isn't non-manifold. That shading looks weird and bad. So yeah, so it's hard to say what is causing your non-manifold geometry, but just start investigating around. There you go. Alrighty, so we have the pants laid out. This one's doing the splits. That's fine. If you're doing some real detailed UVs, you can actually go in and like do a line and like really straighten out some of these UV edges here. And let's do max, and then let's scale those out to get a proper distance there. We can grab all these, scale those up, and then you can unfold the rest around that, and then you can straighten up that border too. So like, that's how you can kind of refine anything that's like that. If you're just doing basic UVs, then you don't need to worry about that too much. But this is more of an advanced technique, and I think it's just good for y'all to know about that. So I can align that. I could go to the min there, and then I could select like all of these internal ones. And then I can like unfold U. I can unfold V. Let's deselect these before we unfold V. We can grab these side ones too to loosen up. And there you go. So you can get some nice rectangularized UVs. I would spend a little bit more time on that, but that's a nice way to get that going, you know. So you can get some nice UVs there. Be careful for any overlapping. Don't want that overlap at all, right? There you go. So you can get some really refined UVs. I'm not going to do that for everything though for this tutorial. I just wanted to display that once. Now let's tackle some more complex shapes. Okay. For instance, a person. Boop. They have a lot of features, right? One of them being the face, right? Now, the face isn't as intimidating as you might think. If you have an interior mouth like this, you definitely want to cut that off. This is a concept that you can apply anywhere, right? If you think about this mesh and how you would construct it, anytime that you would extrude out a longer shape, cut at the base of that shape. That is one of the main sort of ideas behind this, right? Another main idea of where to set up some cuts is along 90-degree surfaces. If you have a 90-degree turn on an object, you'll want to have a seam along that. Another mandatory one is if you have hard normals like that. See how my guy is soft down there? That box has hard normals. Anytime you have that, you gotta cut those hard normals. Otherwise, you're gonna get bake errors, okay? Now, another idea about this is flat objects. So if we have any flat object, like the brim of a hat or something, or like a cylinder like this that is very wide, you want to cut along that edge, and then you can simply unfold it, because this does not have much area to it, right? That'll simply wrap around it nicely, right? So let's actually sew that together and try to unfold on that. Bop. And then let's unfold. Boop, there you go. See that? So that flat object really does nicely with that. If I turn on my checkerboard, I can verify. I'm like, yeah, that looks pretty nice and relaxed, dude. Nice and relaxed. So those are some ideas of where you should put your UV edges. If you have a different material on one spot as well, like if you wanted to have like a little border to that sleeve, you could set up a cut there, and Painter has some nice tools to work with that to make like a little bit of a bevel there in the texture map, okay? So let's enact some of those ideas on this person, right? Here in the mouth, I'm going to turn off the checkerboard so I can see my mesh. I'm going to cut out that mouth shape, the interior mouth shape. And there we go. That should be the whole loop there. And let's do a cut. And let's go into UV shell to verify that we cut out the mouth. Nice, we did, right? Now that mouth itself is a flat shape, right? So I'm gonna do my cut along the side of that flat shape and do that approach. And then I can unfold and unfold. Boom, there you go. Successful mouth unfold. Now the face, a little bit more difficult, right? A little bit more difficult. Now the neck is an extruded object, so you could potentially cut around the neck. The only problem is that is like a pretty visible seam sometimes, and like we were discussing on the sleeve earlier, that can be dangerous. Instead, let's start with one on the front of the face here, right? And I'm going to deselect these edges that are inside the face there, and I'm only gonna have that edge go up to the forehead, okay? So I'm gonna cut that, and let's give that an unfold. There we go. So that's looking pretty nice. Let's check out our checkerboard. We have a little bit of stretching in there, but you have to ask yourself if you want stretching on that part of the mesh, or if you want a seam down the neckline. Let's try a seam around the neck and see if it looks better when we unfold it. Boop, there we go. So those squares look a lot better. Let's go into the face itself, and I'm gonna unfold that now. Shift right click, unfold. That looks pretty nice, okay. I might be down for that. We'll see how they blend together though. If you have really long ears, this guy has got like tiny ears because I Zremeshed the heck out of them. But if you had really long ears, you'd want to cut around the base of that ear and basically just Vincent van Gogh that ear off. There we go. And then you can unfold those shapes and unfold the face again. Perfect. Okay, so that's how you do a face. Pretty nice and easy. Now the arms, different story there. I want you guys to not think of these arms as any different from like the rest of the sleeve, right? If this was a shirt that went all the way down to the wrist, like a long sleeve shirt, then like just do those same seams. That's why I think it's really great to study clothing, because they had to solve this problem as well. So we can simply go into this, and I'm going to cut at the wrist, because this wrist, I'm going to handle the rest of the palm and the fingers differently than the arm. So I'm going to cut that off. We have a UV seam right there, and then I'm going to cut along the bottom of that wrist shape. So there we go. That's going to terminate at the on the inside of the arm there, and I'm going to cut that UV shell. Let's unfold that guy. Boom, there we go. Unfolded arm, perfect. Next up, we can go to the fingers, right? Now this one's gonna be a little bit more of a pain, especially since my geometry is garbage. If it was hand done topology, you probably wouldn't have nearly as much of an issue, but you're gonna see me running into some problems. Let's grab this edge. It's not ideal. Let's grab that edge and let's start turning against the grain. Again, I'm cringing along with any topology lords that are watching this video. It's just for this demonstration. I will ordinarily have a nicer retopoed hand. So we're gonna treat this as a flat shape. Remember, flatter shapes like that, like the cylinder, just cut around the perimeter and unfold. But with this hand, it's pretty flat for the most part, and we're gonna divide it into the bottom and the top, and then we can keep it sewn together around the back of the palm right there, the side of the hand. That way, when we unfold, it's gonna unfold kind of like a book, you'll see, and we'll get like a little bit of a hand spider. So let's see what that looks like. So I'm just gonna select, I'm going across this geometry, and let's get that. Ooh, that geometry gets awful in there. Thankfully, this one's all right. And I'm just going along all of those edges. And then let's get this. Oof. Like I'm saying, I'm cringing along with you guys about my topology here, but I wanted to demonstrate this on a little bit of a scragglier mesh that's from Zbrush, you know, because it gives us unique problems. All right, so that's what I'm gonna do, and then I'm gonna cut. Look at my edge loop there now. You see that? Goes around every single finger, and then when we unfold, let's go into our UV view. I'm gonna unfold that. Boom! Then you got a hand spider. Sorry for the jump scare if you're frightened of spiders, but there you go. That's that hand. And then if we check our checkerboard, there we go. You can see that, and not as much stretching as you might think. You could optimize this and make it, you know, more rectangularized, like that, like the pants that I did right there. But this will be great, and I think this is a great way to start out. The feet, now I am going to, usually we're wearing shoes, you know, and if that's the case, I'm going to kind of treat these like shoes. You want to cut off the bottom of these and go around, let's deselect this. I'm going to deselect that stuff, and if these were shoes, you would cut along the bottom of those and separate the heel off. I'm gonna treat this kind of similar to the hand though as well, if you think about it, because I'm just kind of cutting through here on all of these edges. Let's get onto the underside here. And then let's go to that. There we go. And then let's cut that foot. There we go. So now the bottom is nice and unfoldable. The top, not so much, right? It's kind of mostly unfolding, but you'll want an edge on the back to be cut as well. So you can just double click in this view and get the same result. And then go back into UV shell and, oh, sorry, I didn't actually cut it. There we go. And then UV shell, unfold. Boom, there we go. Look at that. So now we have our entire character unfolded. I recommend hitting it with the Orient Shells tool, and then you can hit layout, and there you go. You got your mesh ready to be exported and textured in Painter. I hope that helps with some UV ideas and concepts. Let's also just look at something with some other unfamiliar shapes, right? So on this big helmet, very spherical almost. It's just like a sphere that got stretched out at the bottom. So I cut that down the half. It's maybe not the best, but it had to be unwrapped somehow, right? If that seam was very unsightly when I was texturing, then I might have to go back and change that, right? Since I have a lot of hard normals, some of these aren't the greatest example of what to do, but like something on like a belt, you gotta cut that down the length of it somehow, right? If you make like a Taurus, you can see that they did the same thing. You gotta cut one of those edges, right? Let me do standard surface so you can see it. You gotta cut down one of those edges, because otherwise how would you unfold it? It would just be like an interconnected tube. How do you unfold a Cheerio, right? Like impossible. So there we go. So that's a shape that you'll encounter for sure. Like a loop like that, you'll have to cut down somewhere in there. You could also cut around the back. I did it right here because it was hidden by that buckle right there. Everything else though, pretty similar. Like these are just like flat shapes, you know. So I would cut those into its own little shell. I had to cut way more because I'm working with a lot of hard normals on this, so you can see that I had to cut those. But yeah, so you generally want to keep that nice and regular. You'll notice that I did a weirder cut right here, and guess what, guys? I'm freaking paying for it. If you zoom in closely, you can see that seam on there. So it's not perfect if you don't leave it. If you leave that seam there, like even though I'm using some triplanar mapping on this texture, it still is gonna have that little bit of a seam. So you wanna mitigate that as best as you can. But yeah, so those are my UV tips, and you're almost ready to send that over to Painter and start texturing. All right, thanks for watching, y'all. Have a good one.